Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we have the privilege of continuing to study the second book of Chronicles, that is Divrei Hayomim Bet. We are up to chapter 15, and we are in the middle of reading and learning about the life of King Asa. King Asa, who was the son of Aviyah, the son of Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, Solomon. And we had learned how King Asa had turned around the spiritual life of the people and brought them back to God. We learned that because of Asa's reliance on God and dedication to God, he was victorious against a major Egyptian army led by a led by an Egyptian officer named Zerach Hakushi, Zerach the Nubian, or Zerach the Ethiopian, or from that land of Cush. Now, in this chapter 15, we are going to read of Asa's spiritual revival of bringing the people back to God and the renewal and rejuvenation of the covenant between God and the people of Israel. We find this at many times, many junctures throughout the history as recorded in Tanakh. We find it during the time of Yehoshua, of Joshua. We find it during the time of much later in Ezra. And this is one of those places where we find people renewing that covenant. So it's an interesting chapter for many reasons, led, of course, by the teaching and messaging coming from a prophet of the time. So who is this prophet? Azaryahu. There's a prophet named Azariah, or Azaryahu, ben Odeid, the son of Odeid. Odeid may or may not be the same as Edo, who came about before we studied, but either way, Haisa Alav Ruach Elohim, he had the Spirit of God upon him. He was a prophet of the time. Asa, he came before the king, and as prophets are wont to do, they speak truth to power, so to speak. And Vayomerlo, he said to him, Shima'uni, listen to me, Asa, V'chol Yehuda, and all of Judah, Binyamin, and all of Benjamin. Remember, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin were the tribes that made up the kingdom of Judah. Those that were under the jurisdiction of King Asa, that had not separated with the northern tribes. Adonai imachem, God is with you, bihiyoschem imo, when you are with him, right? So as long as you are with God, he will be with you. You are just celebrating this victory. Ve'im tidrishuhu, and if you do seek him out, himatzei lachem, he will be found for you. Now, in the last podcast, I emphasized the meaning of tidrishuhu, or lidrosh, to search out God. Lidrosh, to seek out God, is specifically mentioned in the context of seeking out, how am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to behave? To seek out God means to turn to God to decide what is the correct and proper course of action. How do I live and lead my life? It is different from livakesh, which can also be translated to seek, but livakesh, you're usually seeking something from God, right? Or you are in dire straits, so you request of God. But lidrosh, to seek out God in the context of this word lidrosh, always means, right, to seek out in order to determine how to live. I don't know what to do. What do? I turn to God. I am Doresh et Hashem in order to determine my behavior. One can understand that if one were to be, God forbid, Doresh, to do the same thing towards an idol, then the behaviors that one would then be led to do would be abominable behaviors leading to violence, promiscuity, sacrifice to alternate gods, as if they need to be satiated, and so on and so forth, which eventually leads to terrible, abominable practices such as child sacrifices we see so often throughout Tanakh and history. Lidrosh et Hashem means to go to God, seek out what to do, and God tells us through his Torah, right, what the mitzvot are, what the commandments are, how he wants us to live. through justice, through righteousness, through etc. And we will see this as we read deeper into the words of this prophet Azaryahu, who is speaking now. But if you abandon him, Ya'azov etchem, he shall abandon you. V'yamim rabim le'Yisrael, this is verse 3. There have been many days in Israel, right? It has been going for a while. Lilo Elohei emes, where Israel did not have a true God, meaning Israel did not relate to and did not acknowledge the true God. They were searching all sorts of things, but not the true God. And here it's just fascinating how he uses this term emes, truth. God is true, as opposed to all of these other pagan abominations. And there was no Kohen, there was no priest that was teaching. It's interesting here how he emphasizes the job of the Kohen, the job of the priest, as a teacher, as opposed to as someone who leads ritual worship. Ululo Torah, and without the Torah, without the teaching of the Torah of God. In other words, when we do not, the God of truth is a God who we learn about from an honest teacher who wants to teach us the proper way, and he's Torah. He teaches us the way on which to path, the derech lalechas bo, the proper path for us to go upon. Vayoshav batzarlo. However, the people of Israel, when they were in trouble, when they were in distress, they did return al Adonai Elohei Yisrael. They returned to the Lord God of Israel, vayivakshuhu, and they were mivakesh. Remember, I drew the difference between lidrosh and livakesh. Livakesh, they beseeched God, they begged him for help, vayimatzei lahem, and he made himself found to them. He became found. In other words, he allowed himself to be found. In other words, he responded to their prayer. But this is important because this is just step A. To be mivakesh, to pray to God, is step A. The next step is lidrosh. Okay, now that God is with us, now that he is answering our prayer, what do I do? How do I live in order to maintain and nurture and grow this relationship? And in those days, what happens in those days? In other words, those days before the people started and began to seek out God, right? Ein shalom layotzei v'laba. There was no peace for those that were going and coming. People that were traveling were not in peace. There was war. There was violence. There was raiders on the roads and pirates and all sorts of bandits. Kimuhumot rabot. There were so many upheavals. Al kol yoshvei haratzos, and all the residents of the land. This is fascinating because what Azaryahu, the prophet here, is telling us is that the purpose of the Torah is to bring about peace, to bring about cooperation, to bring about a world in which not only the people of Israel live at peace, but kol yoshvei haratzos. We see this emphasis in every single prophet that is mentioned in the Bible, mentions over and over again that the purpose and point of the relationship between God and the people of Israel is in order to bring peace to kol yoshvei haratzos. And if you don't believe me, listen to my podcasts over and over again, or just open a Bible and you'll see over and over again, repeatedly, all of the great prophets understood that their message was universal. And because the people of Israel were not building on that relationship with God, were not searching for the true God, did not have a Kohen, did not have a teacher that taught them the proper way to live, the nation kutsu, right? They were crushing one nation against another nation, be'ir, and one city against another city, because this is what happens when there's multiple gods and everyone is running around in a different direction. This one says my God is better, that one says my God is better, the other one says my God is better, when none of them are actually looking for the true God, who doesn't differentiate between me and you, but the true God that wants us peace. This language of chutisu is the same language that Isaiah uses in the famous phrase where he says, and they will beat their swords into plowshares. He uses the same shoresh, the same word, because the opposite of what we're learning here, where they beat each other with swords. Rather, we want a world in which people work together to make the world better. Ki Elohim hamamam b'chol tzara. because people did not have a relationship with God. God whipped everyone up into all kinds of problems and troubles and all kinds of suffering. So the atem, but you now chizku, be strong. Azaryahu sees the people, and now there's a chance. There's a chance for us to build on this. We're being loyal to God. We fought off this terrible Egyptian invasion. We're finally successful. Let's use this as an opportunity to grow rather than an opportunity to gloat and celebrate our victory and go back down the same evil path that we were on before. Why? There is payment for what you do. There are consequences for your actions. The way you act now will affect the future, will make a difference. It will bring about peace where there will be shalom. There will be peace for those that come. There will be peace between you and other nations if only you fulfill the mission that you have, which is to build upon that relationship with God in order to learn how to live your lives so that the rest of the world learns from you the value of peace and cooperation as opposed to the terrors and destruction of war and fighting. Now, I want to take note of the Navi Amos, right, which we studied together quite a bit while ago. The Navi Amos, or Amos in English, chapter 5, who was addressing the people of Israel, the northern tribes, and he says to them, Kicho Omar Adonai, this is verse 4. So says God Leves Israel to the house of Israel, Dirshuni, seek me out, and he uses specifically the language of Lidrosh, Dirshuni, seek me out, Vichyu, and this will bring you life. This um uh gives us brings back to memory the verses from the Torah that you know, those who attach yourselves to God are all alive. Lidrosh, if you are doresh, it's God. If you search out God and therefore you live the life that He is asking us to live, then you will live. If you al tidredu Beis El, but do not go seek out in Beit El, that is the houses of worship, idol worship, which were established by Jeroboam, that are now, as we study today in the book of Chronicles, the time which we are recounting now is a time in which these houses in Beis El, Gilgal, Lotavo, don't go there, over Sheva, and in Beersheba, apparently there was also such a house of worship. Lotavoru, don't go there. Ki Gilgal golo yigle Beis El yel oven. Because if you go there, those places will eventually go into exile. All going down that path will lead to destruction. Dirshu et Adonai, seek out God with you, and you shall live. Because if you don't, lest you do, if you don't, then the house of Joseph, which refers to the northern kingdom, which is going down the wrong path, they will succeed like a fire of destruction. Mishpat. They turn justice into rotting wood to dakala arts yanicho, and they smash righteousness to the ground. So here we have Amos using very similar language to what we just read and what we just will learn. This idea: search out God, and that will bring life. That will bring success. Do not search out life. And where Amos specifically relates that to mishpat utzedakah, righteousness and justice, in the way that Amos is typical for Amos. However, let's see how this continues, and bear in mind the words of Amos so that we can understand better what's about to read in verse 8 and the rest of this chapter 15. And when Asa heard these words, Oded Hanavi, and the Nevuah, the prophecy of Oded the prophet. This is a little weird because we just said Azaryahu, the son of Oded, was the prophet who said those words. And now we are quoting that Nevuah in the name of Oded. So some say he was called Oded. That's like his family name, right? That's probably the best understanding. Like in those days, they didn't have last names like Smith and Jones or Goldberg and Greenberg. but rather they were called by the names of their father. So sometimes, just like nowadays, you say the prophecy that Mr. Greenberg said, but regardless, it's referring to the same prophecy as before and the same prophet. Um, the other ways to understand it, but that's just how I'm gonna interpret this. Hitchazak, he strengthened himself via aver hashikutzim mikol eretz Yehuda Binyamin, and he destroyed all of the disgusting, abominable um, uh, uh, houses of worship that were, that were dedicated to all kinds of disgusting things from the lands of Judah and Benjamin. That's the lands over which he had jurisdiction, umin ha'arim, and from the cities asher lochad mehar Ephraim, and from some cities which he had captured from Har Ephraim, from the Ephraim, from the territories that were part of the North tribe of Ephraim. So it was part of the northern kingdom territories, which he had captured and taken control over. Vayechadesh et mizbach Adonai, and he renewed the altar of God, Asher lefnei ulam Adonai, which was before the ulam, the portico of God. In other words, the entranceway to the holier portions of the temple. Vayikbot said, Kol Yehudo Binyamin, and he gathered together all of people of Judah and Benjamin, Vihagorim imahem, and those that lived among them, Ephraim, Minashe, Mishimon, from the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh and Shimon. Kinaflu alav mi Yisrael arov biraosam ki Adonai Elohim. When they saw that the Lord God was with them, many of the people of Israel here as opposed to Judah, people from the northern kingdom came down and joined them. So the two groups, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, also had living among them many members of these other tribes, and that became incorporated in the southern kingdom, and we see this throughout Tanakh. Vayikov tzu Yerushalayim b'chodesh hashlishi, in the third month of the year, the month of Sivan, Lishnat Chamesh Esrei L'Malchus Asa, in the 15th year of the kingdom of Asa, they gathered in Jerusalem. Vayizbuchu Adonai Bayomahu Min Hashalal Heviu. They brought sacrifices to God on that day from the booty that they had captured from the battle that was just completed with Zerach HaKushi. Bakar Shvameos, 700 cattle, Vitzon Shivas Alafim, and 7,000 sheep. Remember, a zevach is the type of sacrifice which is slaughtered before God, and portions are given on the altar, but the majority of the animal is eaten by the people. So this was a giant feast where the people ate together before God and rejoiced before God by avo vabris, and they came into a covenant. In other words, they made an agreement together. Now remember the time at which this is being done. This is being written. This is being written again. The chronicler is writing this at the beginning of the Second Temple period, where a similar bris, a similar covenant, was made by Ezra, and in the time of Ezra, a covenant where the people rededicated themselves to God. So recounting this to them is important to understand their sense in the place of history. And what was this covenant? I'm in verse 12 now. Lidrosh es Adonai Elohei Avosehem, to seek out the Lord God. And here it uses the language lidrosh, b'chol levavam u'b'chol nafsham, with their entire hearts and their entire souls. This again reminds us of the language from the Torah, b'yahavta Hashem b'chol levavecha, b'chol nafshecha, right? Right? With all of your heart and with all of your soul, to seek out God. And again, this reminds us of what Amos said: "Seek out God," using specifically the language of lidrosh. And if you are doresh, what did Amos say? V'chyu, then you shall find life. B'chol asher lo yidrosh l'Adonai Elohei Yisrael. But anyone who does not seek out God, and thus instead seeks out other um, sources of strength by going in the wrong direction, going towards the abominations, he will be put to death. Limin katon v'agadol, whether he is a small a person. Here, most likely, this does not refer to a child as a small. It means small in the socioeconomic status. V'ad gadol, to a great person. Limeish v'ad isha, to man or woman. Anyone that doesn't follow this will be put to death. I'm tempted to translate "you must" not as put to death, But as the corollary, as the opposite of what Amos said, one who seeks out God, will find life, and one who does not will find death, because that will be the result, as the prophet just said. It will end up leading to fighting, to war, to banditry, to dishonesty, and so on. But the word yumat is much more accurately translated as put to death. So I have to stay true to the meaning of the word, but the idea is still the same. Vayishavu ladonai b'kol, and as b'kol gadolu, through just to the verse before, again the yumat. If someone seeks out avodah zarah according to the Torah, if one goes towards idol worship, that is the punishment. Anyway, so they swore to God, b'kol gadol, with a great voice, everyone together, u'v'teruah, and with noise, u'v'chatzotzrot, and with trumpets, u'v'shofarot, and with horns. Vayismechu chol Yehuda, and all of the people of Judah were so happy al hashvua, regarding this covenant. Ki v'chol uvavam nishba'u, they made this this oath with all of their hearts, and all of their desire. They were completely dedicated. Bikshuhu, they were mivakesh, they sought him, vayimatzei lahem, and he was found to them. It uses the term livakesh here. They sought God, livakesh, begging God for help, right? As opposed to lidrosh, which has been the real goal. And it shows a tiny little chink in the armor here. This is at least the way I interpret this, right? There was kol levavam nishba'u. Yes, it was their whole heart. They were mivakesh, but they were not doresh, which leads us to the next chapter, which we're going to study together. We still have a few verses left for today, but that there was a little chink in this armor. It wasn't as whole as one would have thought. They were still just begging God because they wanted things for themselves. They wanted legitimate things. They wanted safety. They wanted, and so on. But it was still not 100%. They were not doresh. They were just mivakesh. Vayonach Adonai lohem misaviv, and God had given them peace all around from their enemies, right? So in other words, they were mivakesh, and God gave them, vayimatzei lahem, he was found to them, and he gave them peace. So therefore, with their entire heart, they were mivakesh, but it does not say that with their entire heart, they were doresh, which was the original and appropriate goal. Begam Ma'acha, Aim Asa, Ma'acha, who has popped up a few times. She was the queen mother. The mother, it wasn't really the mother of Asa here, with the grandmother, but regardless, in the Bible, many times a mother or even a grandmother or even farther back generations or fathers are called fathers. The queen mother of Asa, the Hamelach, the king, Hesira Migvira, he took her down from her position. He demoted her from that position, the official position of queen mother, Asher Astolo Ashera Mifletzet, because she made a Mifletzet. A Mifletzet in modern Hebrew usually means some sort of a monster, but here it certainly means some sort of monstrous, terrible object that she made to Asherah. Here, Asherah sounds like a goddess. Sometimes Asherah refers to a tree which was worshipped, or somehow a tree was a symbol for the goddess Asherah. But here he had made for the goddess Asherah, she had made for the goddess Asherah a mefletzet, some sort of abominable, grotesque statue of sorts to worship. Vayichros Asas meflatzta, and Asa had chopped down this abominable object, Vayodek, and he crushed it by Yisrof benachal Kidron, and he burnt its dust in Nachal Kidron, in the Kidron Valley. Bamos lo soru mi Yisrael. However, again, a small chink in the armor. The bamos, the altars that people had in their own homes, in their own hills, in the high places, right? That people were going to worship, right? Where they weren't really supposed to. They were supposed to only go to one place, right? The central place in Jerusalem where they can learn the proper path. Once the people had bamos all over the place, it opens the gates for corruption to enter. But the bamos were not removed. However, levav asa hayashalem kol yamav, the heart of Asa was complete his entire life. In other words, we're going to see in the next chapter of mistakes that he made, but his intention to be with God, at least, right, and not go after these abominations, these idols, was complete his whole life. And he brought the consecrated objects that his father had made and the consecrated objects that he had made, that he had consecrated, presumably from the wars and battles that he won. Beis Elohim, he brought them to the house of God. Kesef, Bezav, Kalim, much silver and gold and other vessels. And from here, which was year 15, when this happened, all the way the next 20 years until year 35, there were no wars. The people were following God, and the result of that is peace. And peace is, of course, the goal, as we heard from the prophecy of Azaryahu. And that concludes chapter 15 on a high note, on a feeling like we finally are getting somewhere. We are finally where we want to be. But of course, unfortunately, that won't last long, which we shall find out in the next chapter 16 when we continue to read of the reign of Asa, King Asa, and we will learn the consequences of those small little chinks, those small little not 100%, and what they led to in chapter 16. I hope you enjoyed studying chapter 15 together. Looking forward to studying the next chapter 16, and of course, the entire book of Chronicles together. Have a wonderful day.